Hi, everyone. I am back. I am Ann Griffin. I'm a product leader and product coach. And if you've been watching my videos, you know that I've been talking a lot about AI and also a lot about how AI is impacting the product field, how we build products. And product managers are not the only ones with product sense that can also build great products. And I'm here actually with Steven Weber, who's a director of engineering at an AI intelligence startup. And Steven and I have worked together, and we both have a lot of experience in prototyping things, working really closely with customers, and iterating quickly. And as these tools, especially in product and engineering, are automating more of the work or making it easier for us to kind of do each other's jobs, the lines between product and engineering are getting really, really blurred. And so I'm here today with Steven to talk a little bit about that here on the Product Mind Lab. Before I go into the first question, anything you just want to say to start out, Steven? If you don't have anything to say before I ask the first question, that's fine too. But I wanted to give you an opportunity.
I'm just pleased to be here and excited to talk to you. I mean, always chatting with you is fantastic. But getting a little geeky sounds even better.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to jump into it because one of the things I said, the reason why I want to talk to you is actually because you have a deep history with prototyping and having a direct relationship with customers, which is not true of all engineers. You used to work on a team where you would go out, actually speak to customers, and you and your team would actually build up a prototype and get that feedback as rapidly as possible and iterate or pivot as quickly as possible. And now we're seeing these tools like V0, Replit, Bolt, and it's creating a lot more overlap between where product and engineering sit. And it's not, I don't think it cuts out each other, but it definitely reduces the amount of time we need to be involved. And it
Hmm.
significantly reduces engineering's, I will say, early decision making in the prototyping, because so many of those micro decisions that happen in the building of it are now happening on the product manager side. And I'm really curious, as an engineer, how do you feel about that?
I really love it, honestly, because it's so many times, a company can just be building feature after feature or product after product and not knowing what to focus on and knowing or getting more ahead of that risk by building prototypes either really quickly or actually building them all the way to the completion can make it so then that risk is moved up, right? So then that way we can
Yeah,
actually accomplish those things way ahead of time and build the right things instead of just building things all the time.
that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I mean, I think it's awesome because I think partly you and I have always worked really well together. So I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
that's it's great to hear those people who are like, hey, this is not something that necessarily threatens me, and we feel like we're gonna get to more rapidly find what we need to build. Is there anything that
Mhm.
you see as a drawback potentially? I think, you and I have always had a really good relationship, but I'm thinking maybe let's think about a company where you worked with PMs who were not really open to feedback, that sort of thing. Like what friction do you think that could create?
Interesting. Yeah. Well, okay. So I would say that there are some drawbacks to having these tools so easily and readily available. Yes, that means that you can test more things. That also means you can build some really, really bad things out there, and then there's not that longevity of support, right? So, say somebody builds an app, right, puts it out there, everybody tests it, and then they're like, "Oh, I'm not interested in this project anymore," and it just gets dumped. And then there's a whole bunch of people, I've seen it before, that get really upset. Like, hey, this is my favorite app. I love this. I put so much into it, or something like that. I put all
Yeah.
my data in there, or something like that. And
Oh,
there's no way to get it out. Like that's heartbreaking, right? We
it
always
is
want to consider
heartbreaking.
like the users and having that empathy. It doesn't always have to be there, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's a troublesome part, I would say.
Yeah. And to your point, it also gets into, well, it makes it easier than ever to just build something and ship it. one of
Hmm.
the key things I also think about is that generative research that technically should come before. You should be talking to
Yes.
customers to even know what is the right prototype to build, because you could also be in a place where, I mean, hopefully every time you launch a prototype, you learn more. But there are also things that when you're not showing something that's already formed, you get to back up and see, hey, maybe there's feedback they're going to be able to, I'll say, having something already formed, they're going to focus their feedback on that thing
Yeah.
versus like, hey, are we even focusing on the right problem? And I think that's, I'll say, one of the drawbacks is for people who are not taking that time to really understand the problem, the industry,
Hmm.
that they might actually just go through tons of these little prototypes, which maybe that's really cheap. It's way cheaper than saying, hey, Steven, I know you're really busy, but can you help me whip up a prototype this week? I'm glad that it's not putting more things on your plate, but also, regardless of if it's a PM, someone in design, or even someone who's maybe more technical, making sure that that generative research piece actually comes first.
Hmm. Yeah. Kind of reminds me of like the early days of like the app stores and stuff like that, when
Yeah.
it was really really easy to build like
Yes.
apps, and just
Yes.
everybody had an app idea, everybody made tons of apps and stuff like that, and there was some not so great ones, right? It just flooded the market with a whole bunch of cheap, not really
Yes.
well made apps, right? And
Very
then it kind
true.
of thinned
Very true.
out. Like we
Yeah.
figured out, okay, make sure you build the right things. Don't spend your time on a whole bunch of things. Just focus on a few things. And so eventually, I hope to see the market just adapt a little bit, over time.
Yeah, I hope so too. I hope so too. So I think it'll be really interesting because I think even just the quality of the prototype someone can whip up for even an interview
Yeah.
will share a lot about their ability to think clearly. But I would love to get into, I've shared some of my favorite tools as a product manager in these videos, but I would love to hear what you're using, because one of the things that you told me about was one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you today, is because I know you've been also using AI to help write test cases. And I would love to hear more about the tools that you're using and the use cases that you're using them for as an engineer.
Yeah. It's always fun to see people's eyes kind of open a little wider when I say, "Yeah, I'm having AI help me write AI," and they're like, "What are you talking about?" But yeah, I fell in love deeply with, I would say, Cursor AI.
Mm.
It I started using it just on the side and stuff like that, just for some fun. And yeah, it has easily made me 30% faster.
Wow.
Easy to say that. Now, Cursor AI, if you're not familiar with it, it looks like VS Code, which is by far the most popular IDE out there. And it just allows you to either send little chat prompts right with giving your context, your code as context, I should say. And or you can use this composer mode, which allows it to do like multi-file editing. So
Oh.
um, I like to use it for either really simple use cases, or even just starting off from scratch of like, hey, I have this idea. I just want to see if I can actually make it really quickly, or if it would work. And sometimes it's just fun to make your own app just for yourself, even, scratch your own itch
Yeah,
a little bit. And
absolutely.
but if you ever like pull down a repo that is just, oh my gosh, there's so much going on here, you can just ask it questions like, hey, where is the authentication part in
Mm,
here? Or can you write a simple documentation for me to
that's
understand it,
nice.
or something like that? So just ask, giving it the ability to ask questions um, about a code base or about how something works really is really helpful for developers, especially ones that are maybe just getting onboarded to some new code base, or
Wow.
even a new
Yeah.
company, honestly.
I love that, especially that onboarding piece, because the number of times where I've started a new company and an engineer has started alongside me, or also I'm at a company and have a new engineer join, and them just trying to wrap their head around, especially having worked in so many early stage companies. Sometimes that early code is messy and a mystery. It's messy. It's a messy mystery. And having developers who are really ambitious and love getting to build things very well with good craft, but also with speed, you
Hmm.
know, feeling that frustration of I want to contribute more and feeling held back by that lack of documentation and people to talk to.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's pretty cheap. It's like $20 a month or something like that.
Oh, that's
So
nice.
it's
Yeah.
yeah. And then there's other good tools if you like or if you code more in say like a terminal or something like that, or maybe you're writing infrastructure code. There's one
Yeah.
called, I think it's called Aider. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly,
Okay.
but it's AIDER. Yeah.
Mm.
And that one is a really good tool. Also scoring really high in what is it, Open
Mm.
Router and stuff like that.
Oh,
So
interesting.
it's a good alternative for more terminal kind of interactions and stuff like that.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. Good to know.
Yeah.
And are you writing your test cases in Cursor? Like, where are you getting those from?
Yeah. Okay. So everybody needs to write more tests, right? And every
Hmm.
developer can always say like, yes, I need to write more tests. But it's especially important if you're a test-driven development kind of developer like me sometimes, where you write tests and you write the feature to pass those tests. So you start from a good foundation. Some people like it, some people don't. But the best part about Cursor is that it can really help you write your tests, and the prompt that you give it is almost means not like it's super simple prompt. You don't have to do prompt engineering or any of that kind of stuff for this.
Mm.
It's give it a function,
Yeah.
and it will give it a function, give it the context of that file, and
Yeah.
say, write me a jest test or something like that for it. Point it to the docs, and then
Hmm.
it'll write some pretty good tests, honestly, for it.
Okay.
And it'll come up with some edge cases even every once in a while, and it'll write mocks and it'll explain it. It's really, really helpful. I use it all the time to help me write my test cases,
I love
honestly.
that. Yeah.
Um, and this is this part where it just makes you faster. So then you can focus on actually how things work instead of just writing the stuff that supports how things work, you know?
That's awesome. Yeah, and that's what I emphasize a lot of using AI to focus on the things that matter, that are going to make the product
Yeah.
successful. And a big part of engineering is not having code that's going to break so often that like really struggles to be successful because no one can
Yeah.
use the product, or key features are, are really slow. And as a product manager, I use actually Claude quite a bit, from just, I'll say if it's something like a PRD or product brief, I use it more for actually feedback, because that
Mhm.
is like, hey, this is the core thing about the product. I want to make sure I'm thinking clearly about what I think is going to make it successful. And then I want to, have it help me find the holes and the gaps and the risks there.
Mhm.
And then I do use it to write almost all my Jira tickets, and especially for bugs, because the way I can just take a picture of what's wrong, explain what's wrong, and then say, here's the format I need you to follow. It does such a phenomenal job writing a very accurate depiction of what happened, um, without it really having that much context. And so, no one's ever been promoted or fired for how they write insurance tickets. So it's something where I'm like, I want it to be clear. I want it to be like, hey, if I'm on vacation, anyone can pick this up and understand what's happening here. But I also don't want to spend the majority of my time there. I want to make sure that's focused on things that can make the product successful. And I also know a lot of PMs are also using Claude kind of as their own like data analyst,
Mhm.
because as either working in startups, they didn't have one, or working in big companies, your data is like one data analyst for the entire company. And, so I really love those use cases. So those are some of the things that I've been using. Obviously, prototyping, and I've said before here, Replit is my favorite because it is the most robust. I love how easy it is to build some really robust features, though there are some other tools like V0 that are really great at design as well.
Mhm.
But Steven, well, before I move on, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I definitely, if maybe you're switching between code and writing documentation,
Yeah,
yeah, all these AI models
yeah,
are pretty darn awesome at writing some
yeah.
documentation for you too. So whether it be a Jira ticket or some kind of Confluence technical document or something like that, it's pretty helpful.
Yeah, yeah.
to break it down, and it can even suggest things like what you should write as well too.
Yeah.
And it really it makes you look much more professional than sometimes we are, honestly, or have time
Yeah.
to be, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Especially in the startup world.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna shift because I know we talked about like where's the overlap, and right now it sounds like there's other than the prototyping thing, which some engineers may feel differently
Yeah.
about, depending, you know, depending on like how much they maybe enjoy getting to be involved in that themselves, and probably also depending on how much PMs are involving developers and kind of feedback in the early prototype process. But before this, we talked about O3, the O3 model from OpenAI. They talked about it and released some test results earlier this year. I'm just actually going to quickly look this up in my computer because I want to understand, like, just really briefly. I was like, let me get this name right. Yeah, the SWE Bench Verified test, it got like 71% on that, meaning that of the tests, I think it's like that one is a subset of tests that maybe is only 500. It scored like 71% on those tests. And so I'm really curious, because that model's not released yet, and I'm curious like your feelings, your thoughts as an engineer on that, and also share my thoughts on it as a PM, because if it can do engineering tasks, obviously it can do a lot of product management tasks as well.
Yeah. I'd like to think that those two things are worlds away, because
Mm,
I mean PMs have a very different perspective and different
mm,
risks and stuff like that. But yeah, anyways, but I digress. So on the development side, though, I'm hoping that it does take a lot of the simpler stuff that we kind of have to go through, and
mm,
project setup or something like that, off our plate. Honestly, I'm hoping
mm.
that it's more like we are overseeing the project, kind of coordinating different
Yeah,
teams or something like that, spotting edge cases, that we get to worry about the things that the biggest risks, or the things that
mm,
kind of fall off to the
yeah,
wayside, unfortunately, while you're trying to build like just the bare bones of some kind of feature or product.
yeah, yeah,
And we just get to be a little more high level, kind of like where I mean, we're still going to be interacting with the code and stuff like that, but maybe we're not hands on as much with the code, and we're more overseeing like the development of the code and
I
reviewing it
see.
and stuff like that. So,
Yeah,
I mean, I think that's the hope for a lot of AI, is like it makes it so then the the boring, mundane things are a little easier, because again, it's trained off of the a lot of code that is just
yeah,
mundane, probably code. It's not the high end, really difficult code. So it's
yeah,
not going to
that's
be
very possible.
it's
Yeah,
not going to be as great at that part. Now,
yeah,
that just allows our creativity to come out a little bit, I think, stronger, I would say, or
yeah.
at least I hope so.
I hope so too. I do think it's going to change the environment significantly.
Yeah.
Um, won't dive too deep into it, but I know you and at least I said, or like before we started this recording, how I think that in places that they're not really doing product development in a way that is focused on like how do we bring the most value, and it's
Yeah.
kind of more based on, well, this is just how a company is structured and this is why we have this headcount, and it's more about company politics and like history and that sort of
Mm.
thing. I think a lot of those jobs are going to disappear. I think there are going to be a lot more things where it's going to be a lot longer before certain small startups are going to need more engineers to be able to scale. But I don't think the jobs will go away completely, but I do think it's going to be harder.
Yeah.
Um, and so it'll be interesting. And I think the same thing for a lot of PM skills, where we'll focus on the things that really matter, but then a lot of this will get automated. And going back to engineering, one interesting thing is, are you familiar with Devin? I think it's Devin
Yes.
AI. It's for those of you who are not familiar, Devin is basically an AI agent that does its own coding. I don't want to say autonomously, but you give it a task and it does it.
Yeah.
And some people have more success than others with it. But I've seen some people say, "Hey, I give it the most simple tech debt items, and it just goes at it." And then we're not wasting our really talented engineers' time on this stuff, even though it really also still needs to happen. So
Yeah.
it goes back to what you were saying, is like more time to focus on the biggest risks and the creative areas.
Yeah. On the flip side, it might make it harder, Devin, and just general AI tools might make it harder for like people that are just starting out in software development uh, um, to get started in these different companies. I think that
Yeah.
might be an implication. I would say.
I would say I think that's really, I think that's true. And even you're seeing the job market of entry level people who want to get into tech, that being harder for them already.
Yeah.
And once those models get better, I think that's only going to get harder. And
Yeah.
part of that is because it does a lot of the type of work that
Mm-hmm.
someone just entering in might end up having to handle. And you're going to want someone who already has a certain level of iteration with craft and to, be guiding the AI for
Yeah.
your building your product. So there's a lot of implications. And I honestly think we're going to start seeing them, you know, as soon as probably end of this year. I like when O3 gets released, I wouldn't be shocked if like I think I saw like JP Morgan Chase said they're not going to hire anymore, maybe in the US or something this year. And maybe I read that wrong, but I think some of them are anticipating certain changes in
Yeah.
what they're doing. So we will see. We will see. I think those are the core things I had on my list. Anything that you think I forgot to mention, Stephen?
No, I can't think of anything. No.
Okay. Well, it was such a pleasure to talk to you. I'm so glad we got to connect and talk about this. I hope this was also helpful to everybody watching. Again, I'm Ann Griffin, a product leader and product coach. This is Stephen Weber, Director of Engineering at AI Intelligence Startup. Also, if you are looking to learn more about AI in general, I have Jumpstart Your AI Career coming up on February 24th on O'Reilly. You can register in the link that is probably included somewhere with this video. And anything I may be forgetting, I'll include with the video as well. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day. Stay curious. Bye.